Well, joining me now is someone who could be Nigeria's next president, Kingsley Moghalu. He's a former Under-Secretary General at the UN and Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Kingsley, thanks for coming on the show. Theresa May in Nigeria just in the past few weeks, most populous country in Africa. She said Britain's going to be a strategic or a key partner after Brexit. Will we be under your presidency?
Why not? So long as, Nigeria's national interest is also served in that partnership. There's no reason why not. I mean, we have very important relations with Britain. They were a former colonial power. And Nigeria is a very important market in the world and in the emerging markets.
Because she visited Shell oil in Nigeria,
Yes.
Shell very linked to there. When she was Home Secretary, the UK arguably had very good relations. We are still exporting arms to the Buhari government. And some were believed to go to Tom Polo, someone wanted for alleged theft and money laundering.
Well,
what is the British government's relationship to your country?
Well, I really wouldn't know about the specific case you mentioned. But the British government has important relationships with Nigeria. Those relationships are economic, they're political, they're military, and possibly intelligence.
Because under John Major, Britain supported Nigeria being thrown out of the Commonwealth when
that was because
executions in the Niger Delta.
Exactly, absolutely, yeah. But that's long ago, and the relationship has gotten back.
Do you believe Buhari has sorted things out there as regards the Niger Delta?
Not necessarily. The Niger Delta still has a lot of issues. That part of Nigeria remains very poor. There's a lot of environmental degradation, which Buhari's government has promised to clean up in Ogoniland, but that hasn't happened yet. It's not a promise that has been kept, unfortunately. So the whole question of crude oil being the goose that lays the golden egg in Nigeria, and yet the people who lay the goose is not benefiting anything. So Nigeria's political client elite has benefited from oil, but the poor masses of Nigeria's citizens have only gotten poorer. And that includes many people from the Niger Delta, where the oil comes from.
Theresa May particularly talked about cooperation as regarding the war on terror. Why I was talking about that Tom Polo case, because Vince Cable, the head of the Liberal Democrats, was business secretary then. Philip Hammond was chancellor. You don't know any connection. They all deny any wrongdoing there. What is the relationship between Buhari and so-called warlords in Nigeria and Boko Haram, which is what Theresa May was referring to with our strategic defense partnership with Nigeria?
Well, I mean, Buhari is the president of Nigeria, so he has a responsibility to secure the country against terrorists.
And he says he's been very successful at doing it.
He has tried, but whether his best has been good enough is another question, because Boko Haram continues to attack Nigerians. And we continue to have terrorism in other ways, including...
You don't see any relations between the current president and those Islamist groups?
Not necessarily, and not really.
Because former Minister Femi Fani-Kayode says that Buhari supports people involved in Boko Haram.
I don't think so.
Disagree with that former aviation?
I don't think I would say that. I would say he has failed to secure the country against terrorists.
There's no connection between anyone in the Buhari cabinet over the years?
I wouldn't know.
With these groups?
I wouldn't know. The real problem that people feel that Buhari is not acting decisively enough about is the herdsmen. The Fulani, the so-called Fulani herdsmen, who have killed Nigerians around the country on so many occasions, and yet none of them really has been brought to justice. And many people wonder, why is the government incapable of controlling these herdsmen who have become really killers?
It's a competence issue as regards the president.
It's an issue of competence, and it's an issue of political will.
So he has nothing to do with Janjaweed elements, Boko Haram elements at all, as far as you know?
Boko Haram and the so-called Fulani herdsmen are two different issues. The reason his government has failed to secure Nigeria is because they have a very simplistic understanding of national security. In Nigeria, 99% of the security chiefs in Nigeria come from one part of the country. So it is obvious that the guiding principle is parochialism. They come from Buhari's part of the country. They're not diversified. Nigeria is a big and complex country. And for you to have all the intelligence you need to have people from different parts of the country.
What do you think the Americans think? Do you think the CIA would support your candidacy? We have a declassified 83 document saying the CIA liked this man. Back in 83?
Well, I cannot comment on the operations of intelligence agencies, but I can tell you that my focus is on what the people of Nigeria think. And the people of Nigeria do not think highly about the performance of the President Muhammadu Buhari government today. They believe it's a failure, and there's a groundswell of opinion that the recycled old politicians have failed us. It's 60 years of independence, and Nigeria's citizens have gotten poorer and poorer, whereas the country has a lot of potential, as everyone knows. Some of us think it's time for something new, something different, and something bold. Someone like myself, for example, I think I would be able to engage international partners much more effectively, whether it's the United States or Russia or the United Kingdom. I have been a professor in the United States. I have been a United Nations official for many years. I have been a deputy governor of the Nigerian Central Bank.
But you said that about Russia and the United States. How important is BRICS? Would you improve relations vis-a-vis Nigeria than President Buhari?
Of course.
How?
Because I understand economics. President Buhari's government has not shown a very effective understanding of how international economics works, or even how local economies can be developed.
Okay, but geostrategically, from WikiLeaks, we know diplomatic cables show Shell trying to stop China and Russia from gaining oil contracts.
Well, there's always...
Would the government have known about that? Would that pass your desk as president?
Probably.
Would you favor Shell or would you favor Russia?
No,
and
I
China?
can't. I favor the Nigerian national interest, and we are prepared to work with various international partners, so long as Nigeria's interests are protected. The problem with Nigeria's politicians, which is why the people increasingly want a new visionary kind of leadership for Nigeria, is that these politicians are very corrupt and they're only out for their own interests. The interests of the multinationals and various countries is legitimate, but the interests of Nigeria and Nigerians are also legitimate. And we can work out a win-win scenario. It's not either or.
But why hasn't it worked so far? The IMF have been down there, World Bank have been down there.
It hasn't worked because of the incompetence of Nigeria's political leaders. They don't understand economics. They don't understand international relations.
It's all Nigeria's fault, Nigerians' fault. It's not the...
Well, if you allow, if you allow foreign negotiating partners to screw you, whose fault is it?
Well, I was just about to get onto that.
I'm sorry.
You don't think it suits some partners in NATO nations, perhaps, to keep Nigeria doing not so well, so it doesn't become too competitive?
No, it's not about that.
So it is the Nigerians' fault?
Mainly it is, because international relations countries are pursuing their own interest, and that's normal.
President Buhari might say to you, look, I've just sacked Babachar Lawal, Nigeria's most senior civil servant. This shows
After defending him, but he defended him. He defended him. He only let go of him.
Or resignation.
It was a non-event. President Buhari has shown a complete lack of will to fight corruption inside his own government. I don't think the government is fighting corruption in the way it should, impartially, in terms of accountability, or even proactively in terms of putting in place transparencies that can prevent corruption. Like someone said, the allegations of corruption in the Buhari government are treated with deodorant. Allegations of corruption against the opposition are treated with insecticide.
Well, Libya, where I have to say, some people are rumored to be running from Nigeria to Libya. Was the Libya war a good idea? The war that Theresa May says she still would have supported when Britain bombed Libya? Well,
the issues in Libya are very complex. It affects Nigeria in a number of ways. Number one, a lot of Nigerian migrants are moving away across the channel, going to Libya and trying to stage, using Libya as a staging port for crossings to Europe. So that's a big problem. The Libyan war in itself, interventions like the intervention in Iraq and the intervention in Libya, we have seen how often they have led to state failure.
Would you have supported the Iraq war, the Libya war?
I probably would not have. Because when nations that define their national interest in the context of attacking certain nations, well, that's a defense of their own national interest. Now, Libya was an African country. For several years, Libya has now been in chaos. So who has benefited from that? I was never a fan of Gaddafi. Never was I a fan of his. But the fact is that there's a lot of chaos in that country today. So what has really been achieved, just as what happened in Iraq?
And just finally and briefly, although we could have had the whole interview on this subject, you were the UN legal advisor at the International Criminal Tribunal in Rwanda. There's a show on TV here in Britain called Black Earth Rising. I got to ask you, so many years on since hundreds of thousands were killed, was the West implicated in any of that mass killing in Rwanda?
Well, Well, the West was implicated in the sense that they did not intervene when they should have. I mean, I think that's obvious. In 1994, they stopped the UN from a muscular intervention that could have stopped the genocide. I remember how traumatizing it was to listen to some of the testimony in the War Crimes Tribunal for Rwanda in the courtrooms. And I was the legal advisor and I was spokesman for the International Tribunal. And, but it was also something very gratifying that we were able to bring the architects of that genocide to justice. So that was a big success story for the
Although,
United
do you think
Nations.
it's the end now? Donald Trump's national security advisor saying the ICC, the International Criminal Tribunal, the ICC is dying and may it die.
One of the problems of the International Criminal Court is that practically all its defendants have been African countries. Are African countries the only ones, or Africans, the only ones who commit war crimes?
Apparently, according to The Hague.
Well, that tells you there's a problem. I disagree with the concept of a veneer of global justice that is simply a cover for bringing the weak to account, whereas the strong escape the justice of international law.
Kingsley Moghalu, thank you.
You're very welcome.
After the break. Thinking of doing an MBA at one